And we have now the incredible honor to interview my friend, Dr. John Ashton. Dr. John, good morning to you. Thank you so much for talking to us at the Breakfast Show.
Good morning, Joseph.
Yes, I'm very grateful to listen to your voice. Now, Dr. John, I have a big question for you because when I'm talking to people about the biblical account of the flood, there is this, the Bible says that even the highest peaks have been covered with water. Some skeptics, they roll their eyes and they say, surely there's not enough water in the planet to cover even the highest of mountains. How do we respond to that? What evidence is there? Is it true? Is that an impossibility, or is there something else that we can consider?
All right, yes. Yes, a lot of people do scoff at the concept of a global flood. And of course, the story of Noah's survival and this sort of thing. But it's fascinating the evidence that is accumulating now. And I think there's a couple of issues here. It talks about covering the highest mountains at the time, but we know that, for example, today a lot of the mountains that have been pushed up after the flood. And we know this because, for example, in the Himalayas, where you've got some of the highest mountains on Earth, there are fossils of sea creatures and shells and so forth that lived on the bottom of the sea. In Peru, for example, archaeologists. Not archaeologists, paleontologists were surprised to find massive deposit of large number of whales and dolphins and these sort of things that were preserved, very well preserved on the mountains of Peru. And the other thing, of course, is too, if we look at, say, the mountains in Hawaii, some of those are actually, because they're rising up from the seafloor, they're very high. They're actually higher in height from, say, ground level than evidence. So we can see the surface of the Earth is contoured quite a lot. But if we look at the very deep parts of the ocean compared to the very high mountains, there's large extremes there. So we have evidence that the surface of the Earth was changed very much so. For example, if we look at Ayers Rock, Uluru in Australia there, those layers are vertical. And so here we have this massive monolith, but yet those rock layers are vertical. They've been distorted from being horizontal when they were laid down to vertical. So we have these massive contortions that occurred on the surface of the Earth.
Oh, I didn't know that. So in Uluru, we have vertical instead of, because normally you see horizontal marks like Grand Canyon and canyons in general. They are pretty common to see these in the geology. But with Uluru, it is as if that monolith was actually once like it rotated 90 degrees.
Oh yeah, those beds, yeah, that's right, yeah, massive rotation.
Wow, okay.
And we see lots of examples of this, around the world, where you have layers that were down, and then some of them have been rotated at right angles or been bent at right angles. And again, powerful evidence that all these layers can't have been laid down over millions of years because they would have been so hard due to compression factors and so forth. But now, and they're bent and not cracked. So we have overall massive evidence around the world, plus we have these massive sedimentary deposits around the world. Now, one of the main issues for the flood is and indeed for the oceans of water that we have, is where did all this water come from? And, the current sort of prevailing theories for a long time were that the water came here as ice from comets and so forth, crashing into the Earth. But it's quite revealing now, discoveries that were made probably a couple of decades ago and really just highlighted recently, the massive amounts of water that are actually trapped in the mantle, are trapped well below the surface of the Earth.
So how much water is there? Like if we were going to transport all that water into the surface, for example, or just add them into the ocean, how much would that represent? Do we know?
Well, yeah, scientists obviously haven't travelled down there and sort of actually physically had a look. But from calculations from seismic data and so forth, analysis of rocks that have come up to the surface in volcanic eruptions, this sort of thing, the material is ringwoodite, which is 9-magnesium orthosilicate. And it traps the water. It's estimated that the amount of water down there is probably equivalent to 3 times the volume of water in the oceans on the Earth.
Wow, 3 times of all the oceans?
Yeah, 3 times the amount of water than trapped in all the oceans. So this is a huge amount of water there. Now, it is chemically bound. It's not as if there's this great ocean sloshing around down there as the Earth rotates. This is water that is sort of bound in a way but can be released. Now, there's also, we know that there is still a lot of underground water that's being released when we have volcanic eruptions. I forget I think it's in the Atlantic Ocean. There's massive freshwater influx there occurring underground in places. But the thing that got me about some of this research is that the Bible talks about the fountains of the deep opening up and providing this water. So we know that the surface of the Earth would seem from our geological understanding of structural geology that the surface of the Earth was very much different before the flood, and there's this evidence of massive volumes of water coming out at that particular time, and so totally changing the topology of the Earth. So the Earth had a lot less surface water. There was a lot more ground area. The other fascinating thing is, of course, we also observe, and we have overwhelming evidence for the ice ages, and they were fairly recent in terms of the so-called, in secular terms, the last ice age, only about 12,000 years ago, according to their reckoning. And they have a number of ice ages too. But we have to understand that there's actually no workable explanation for how the ice age could form other than the flood. And the flood provides, and groundwaters, hot groundwaters being emitted or into the Earth, mixing with the ocean waters, and thus making warm water here, created the evaporation which caused the ice age. And when we do the calculations, it works brilliantly to fit that there was one massive ice age, and it was recently. And it fits in with the biblical timeline, actually, and can explain a lot of the migration that occurred after the flood and after the Tower of Babel and so forth, because this ice age would have essentially formed just after the Tower of Babel.
So let me understand. Let me ask this question. So one evidence that we have is, look, there are fossils of even large maritime animals in like really tall mountains in the Himalayas, in Peru, in the Andes. Number one. Number two, the Earth would probably be like, the mountains would probably be less dramatic and a little bit more flatter. Like the average height could well be much lower during the pre-Diluvian era. And number three, we have like these massive water deposits, like 3 times more than the current existing oceans underneath. So my question would be, how did the ice age eventuate? Because you mentioned that there's like a lot of water trapped in the surface that would evaporate and will come down, and I'm understanding as a condensation as snow. But why would the Earth be cooler than normal? Why would it snow in more places than normal? Is there anything also blocking the sunlight, for example, causing the Earth to be cooler? What's the mechanism there? Do we have any explanations?
Oh yeah, it's just part of the evaporation cycle. And so what happens is that, I don't know whether you don't see it so much, but when I was a boy, I used to see cars driving around. They had a little canvas bag on the front, and that was full of water. And the idea was that the canvas is sort of porous a little bit, so a little bit of water evaporates, and that cools the water inside it. So what happens is that we had this warm water that came up, it evaporated. As it evaporates, it takes with it heat energy. And so this leads to a cooling effect. and the water then begins to cool vast areas, particularly near the poles. And so the ice would have spread from the poles further south initially, and then over time this melted and returned. So as the oceans then froze due to this evaporation effect, that then created the land bridges and enabled then the migration patterns that we see, so that the people could move from the area around, across to the Americas and down to Australia and these sort of things. So it beautifully explains the migration patterns of humanity. And also when we look at population levels too, if we had the flood about, 4,500 years ago or thereabouts, it perfectly explains the migration levels and the population levels. For example, in the Americas, the move through the Pacific and so forth, is all very recent. Most of the American civilizations, date back only a couple of thousand years. And so we have really powerful evidence here for the biblical scenario of the migration of the nations. And it's interesting that even when we look at the cultures in America, in South America, in Polynesia, in Africa, of course through Europe, and even the indigenous cultures here, they all have stories of the flood.
Wow.
And
that's quite amazing.
Yeah, these have been studied by, secular, sort of scholars looking at the movements of people and historical accounts that have been passed down through their traditions. So we have evidence from, the fact that the earth obviously contained a lot more water, underground water. It can explain a lot of the movements of the geological structures that we see. Because some of it's hard to imagine, just in our mind, to comprehend how massive the amounts of water must have been that it laid down the deposits in Central Australia. They're huge. They spread over, thousands of square kilometres, this sort of thing of land here. And we've got the...
You mean the water deposits or mineral deposits?
No, the water spreading... areas of strata, spreading areas of sand over huge areas. The same in America. You've got the Morrison Formation that has a lot of the dinosaur fossils and this sort of thing. It spreads from, New Mexico to Canada. What water movement is going to spread a layer, sort of 50 metres or maybe 100 metres thick of sediment over an area that size, the size of the United States pretty well, There were these deposits are huge, like the limestone deposits that have been set down, chalk deposits spread from Ireland to Turkey. And we know they were formed at the same time as the massive deposits that are all under Australia there and exposed in the Great Australian Bight and so forth. So the evidence for the flood, for a global flood, for this global catastrophic deposition of massive amounts of minerals, conglomerates and rocks, and and the water flow in some places must have been huge. You have boulders a couple of meters in diameter being rolled along.
Yes, well, imagine the sheer strength of water necessary to roll these massive monoliths along. Dr. John, we do have to move on, but I just want to thank you so much for bringing such a fascinating topic, and it's incredible how much evidence there is to support the biblical account of the flood. Thank you so much for bringing that up to us, and we're looking forward to talk to you again next time on the show.